Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this public event as part of the Atlantic Council's programming for this year's annual IMF-World Bank meetings. I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, and it's my particular honor to welcome an individual I've long thought is one of the most interesting global economic and financial thinkers, His Excellency Minister Mohammed Aljadaan, who joins us today in his dual capacity as Minister of Finance for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Chair of the International Monetary and Finance Committee. So thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Minister. And I'm sure we'll have plenty of chance to, after your opening comments, for you to field questions both on the global financial situation and also on Saudi Arabia. My thanks as well to Her Royal Highness Prince Rima bint Bandar Al Saud, the Kingdom's Ambassador to Washington. Thank you for joining us as well today. Over the next 45 minutes, we'll explore both the Kingdoms and the global economic outlooks. The event is organized by the Atlantic Council's MENA Futures Lab and the Geoeconomic Center. The MENA Futures Lab is an initiative by the Atlantic Council's Rafi Kariri Center for the Middle East that reflects our commitment to advancing the socio-economic well-being of the MENA region. Through scholarships, through fellowships, and the curation of leading knowledge capital, the MENA Futures Lab will focus on education, community building, and fostering entrepreneurship and innovation. His Excellency Aljadaan has served as the Minister of Finance of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia since November 2016, where he has overseen fiscal reforms, diversification policies, and financial sector transformation as part of Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 agenda. I think anybody who's been watching the Kingdom over the last decade knows what a series of courageous and far-sighted decisions have been made, and we'll get into those as well. He previously served as chairman of the Saudi Capital Market Authority and as acting Minister of Economy and Planning. Beyond his national titles, His Excellency also plays an important role on the international financial stage as he currently serves as chair of the International Monetary and Financial Committee. So, Mr. Minister, it's my honor to turn the floor to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Frederick, and the Atlantic Council for the opportunity to be with you today. I will not take too long. I promised Frederick that it's going to be only 2 hours speech. So let me start with global economy. As you know, the global economy is facing multiple challenges. Indeed, global growth remains subdued, fiscal buffers are narrowing, and the cost of servicing sovereign debt is rising. This has placed pressure on both advanced and developing economies. The story of global economy, and indeed every nation within it, is not being written by circumstance, but by choice. We can choose to retreat to uncertainty, or we can choose to confront it with vision, collaboration, and courage. Today, one of the most significant global risks we are monitoring is the escalation of sovereign debt. This challenge now includes countries in all income levels, and debt carries profound implications for global economic stability. High public debt is constraining fiscal space, leaving less room for countries to maneuver. Many high-income and emerging market economies will need more fiscal space to manage aging population and declining labor force. They will also need fiscal space to adapt to and benefit from economic disruptions like AI. For developing economies, the challenges are even more existential. Interestingly, about 3.4 billion people, so that we are clear, this is almost half of the world, 3.4 billion people now live in countries that spend more on debt service than the basic public utilities like health and education. This is very serious. This is indeed the fundamental misallocation of resources away from where they are needed most. Meanwhile, official development assistance from advanced economies is shrinking, in part due to lower fiscal space. And by the way, this is not only the US. The US, Europe, and emerging economies. If you see the trend, the assistance to low-income countries is dropping every year. This leaves low-income countries even more vulnerable. In my capacity as the chair of the International Monetary and Financial Committee of the IMF, I'm working closely with members to A, raise awareness of this problem. It is very serious, it is haunting us, and we need to deal with it. Second, to advance practical and coordinated solutions that restores fiscal space, strengthen resilience, and provide relief, including through the G20 Common Framework. Debt in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. To manage debt properly, the goal should not simply be to reduce debt. That's very easy to say. It's very difficult to do. The trick is to wisely use the debt. Most economists agree that the correct path to transform public debt into public wealth. This can happen by channeling that debt towards productive investments that expand a nation's capacity to grow and prosper. And this includes investments in critical infrastructure, expand digital connectivity, and investing in human capital. Likewise, using debt to provide counter-cyclical support in a downturn helps to prevent a deeper crisis and will protect livelihood. Unfortunately, there is a less than optimal path on debt, one that actually increases risks, harms the future. Large, sustained increases in debt, if they do not include productive public investments, are simply a tax that we are imposing on the next generation without actually giving them the tool to repay it. With challenges and opportunities like these, the world needs strong leadership. That leadership has to have a bold vision on transformation and determined delivery that can inspire citizens and build momentum for change. I can tell you firsthand, transformation is never easy. Transformation is tough and requires tough decisions. A bold vision on transformation and determined delivery that can inspire citizens to build momentum for change. It demands tough choices, consistent prioritization, and the courage to stay the course when results take time to materialize. It's not easy, but it is a must. In Saudi Arabia, we have come together behind a clear long-term vision to transform our economy and society. It is our North Star, which is called the Saudi Vision 2030. A major part of the motivation behind Vision 2030 is to diversify our economy away from oil, to focus on non-oil sectors. On this front, we have already delivered tangible success. Saudi Arabian non-oil activities grew by 4.8% in the first half of 25, now contributing to over 55.6% of our total GDP. If you ask anyone who knows Saudi a little, they will tell you we are heavily oil dependent. Now it is 56% non-oil economy. For a transition this profound, it requires the efforts and commitment from everyone. That's why women have been central to our vision, and why we have made transition easier for them to enter the workforce. The unemployment in Saudi Arabia is now in its lowest in the Saudi history. This did not happen by accident, but we put pen onto paper, built a comprehensive plan, and marched towards delivery and execution. Governments that want to benefit their people over the long term, even in the face of economic adversity, need to approach the economic challenges with determination and with a realistic plan for growth. It also requires bilateral and multilateral cooperation. There are problems that you cannot fix on your own, no matter how big you are. And in this regard, Saudi Arabia is determined to play a positive role in the global economic affairs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, Your Excellency, for those very clear comments and short comments, but much shorter than the 2 hours that you promised. Let me start with where you started. You could have chosen to highlight any number of things in the global economy and Saudi economy, but you started with debt. And if I were writing the headline for any financial journalist here, I would almost say that the minister rang the alarm bell on debt. Would that be correct to say that? And if so, how close is the problem to the door? How immediate do you see the debt problem that you've highlighted?
I think it is happening. We are seeing the initial signs that that is becoming a very, very serious challenge. What is troubling is that we are not doing enough to deal with it. And obviously there are a lot of circumstances and political reasons for that not to happen. My role is to make sure that people are aware of it, people like you are aware of it, and encourage governments around the world to actually come together and deal with it very quickly. I think it is happening. We are seeing it. We are seeing almost a perfect storm forming that we just need to be careful and do whatever we can to avoid it.
So perfect storm. Let's talk about that a little bit more. Under your G20 presidency, and you referred to that in your comments, the G20 Common Framework for Debt Treatments was established. You mentioned that as well. And you also mentioned it in an article published a couple of days ago. And your quote in that article was, "In the most distressed cases, of increasing debt to GDP where debt service is simply no longer feasible. Restructuring becomes unavoidable. Could you talk a little bit about that? And also, how do you view debt restructuring creating more policy transparency and an orderly process for creditors? So it's one thing to use the term restructuring, it's another to actually execute it in a way that works.
I mean, obviously it's not easy, and the common framework is possibly the only, actually it is the only, currently the only structure that is available to the world for countries in distress to come and restructure their debt. It's the first and the only one that actually brings the Paris Club members, the non-Paris Club members, and the private creditors together. And we have seen actually successful examples so far, 4 or 5 countries that actually went through the process successfully. The problem with it, there is no proper institutional setup that actually makes it easier and more transparent. So I've called for the structure to be more institutional, so we could possibly agree a secretariat, permanent secretariat, just like the Paris Club, and possibly even more clear process with almost like an SLA between creditors that they need to come together, what needs to be done, what kind of data that will be shared, and how transparent and easier we make it for countries to come forward. Currently, even distressed countries are worried, A, about the length of the process, and B, to some extent about the reputational risk. And if we can make it easier, straightforward, and predictable, I think that will go a long way to help particularly the most distressed nations.
That makes sense. After a couple more questions, a few more questions from me, I'll turn to the audience. Also, for those of us watching from around the world, you can put your questions on askac.org. They'll pop up on my screen, and please, as you write in your questions, also identify yourself as well and where you're writing from. So I know you're a minister, you're also a diplomat, so pointing fingers is probably not the most diplomatic thing to do in the world, but if you're looking at the debt problem, there's a debt problem in Africa, there's a debt problem in parts of Europe. Certainly, one speaks about a U.S. potential debt problem. If you're looking around, is there a specific area, region that concerns you the most, or is this a generalized problem that you're talking about?
I think today it's actually a very generalized problem. I think you will find it in advanced economies, a lot of advanced economies. Actually, advanced economies are now way more than 100% of GDP debt. You will see it in emerging economies, you will see it in low-income countries, so it's really wide spread a problem that will need to be dealt with.
So let's move from debt to a couple of other global context questions, and then we'll turn to Saudi Arabia. The fund has made important initial strides in addressing the high demand for generative AI, and we're seeing just a lot of money come into the market, a lot of talk about AI. About 14 trillion of direct AI capital spending is planned over the medium term. I'm not sure about that number, but it's cloud-related costs. How does the application of AI in the global marketplace impact productivity and job creation? People are talking about worries about a bubble, but saying that AI investments are quite different than internet investments. This is not the 1990s. This is something quite different. How are you looking at this in a global financial standpoint?
I will not go into the bubble thing, but generally bubbles does not have, a clear shape that you can identify them. So I will not go there. But generally, I would say, if we are not careful at a global level, AI can actually increase the divide between countries and within countries. So it will most likely increase productivity and help actually economies to prosper if used right, and if there are more efforts on an inclusive approach to AI. The second point is obviously there are significant challenges in supply chain and energy. And if you look at just around the world, with countries without AI, you will find actually, just to give an example, the grid system is collapsing in a lot of countries or about to collapse. I mean, it's just at the edge of the maximum capacity. And if you add the significant energy demand that AI requires, I think one wonders whether it is possible actually to do something as fast, as ambitious as the industry wants to move. And the last point I wanted to mention is there is a mindset change that needs to happen for countries and actually individual companies and businesses to benefit from AI, which is the ability to change the mindset to be able to say, actually, I cannot perfect it. I need to try it and correct the course while I'm trying it. Mm-hmm. Just get the benefit and enhance as you go. Because if you are going to wait to be reaching a perfect solution to a particular use case, you will not actually benefit. You will be behind. But that is in the implementation side. But from the economic macro side, I think there are a lot of challenges that AI ecosystem will need to deal with. The 14 trillion that you talked about. I mean, if you throw 14 trillion in a short period of time, the basic economists around the room will tell you that would likely create a serious overheating somewhere, mm-hmm. and may even cause, a circuit to break in one economy or another.
Mm-hmm. And that gets to something we were talking about earlier, which is overall volatility that we're in. And, somehow growth has held up. Global growth has held up. U.S. growth has held up. At the same time, the WTO is now projecting world merchandise trade growth to slow from 2.8% 2024 to 2.4% 2025 and further in 2026. And it's talking about front-loading, policy uncertainty, tariff measures. So how will changes in trade policies impact global growth? And then this is linked as well to your debt issue, because if you're not growing fast enough to pay off your debt or service your debt, then that becomes an even bigger problem than it is now.
Absolutely true. Two things. One is, I think we should try and use whatever gadgets that we have in our brain and analytical tools to separate noise from reality. If you recall, when we were here during the spring meetings, there were a lot of anxiety about what's going to happen to the world after the announced tariffs. In reality, actually, the world proved to be a lot more resilient than what we thought. And now you could see OECD, IMF, World Bank, and other institutions adjusting their growth projections to be more positive. The world proved, the US economy proved to be more resilient. The emerging economies proved to be more resilient. And somehow I think wisdom would prevail in the trade discussion, because it's a lose-lose if you go the full fragmentation drive. And you could see that. I mean, the authorities around the world are actually coming up with more practical, pragmatic solutions that held actually the world economy in a better position than it would have otherwise when we were projecting in April what will happen in 25. To me, my call, and I can tell you a Saudi position, is we really believe in multilateralism. We believe in cooperation, and we think no one can resolve some of the big problems of the world alone, no matter how big they are. And you could see that day after day.
So if you look at the numbers, when the Trump administration came in, you had a 2.5% average tariff level in terms of U.S. tariffs. It's now, depending on who you measure, around 18%. Maybe if you look at what's actually gone through into the market, 9 or 10%. How do you explain that it hasn't done more harm than it's done? How do you explain this resilience? And is this temporary? Is it just going to take some time for this to work its way through the system? Or how do you look at the risk?
I don't want to speculate, but I'll give you my 2 cents reading of this. First, I don't think actually tariff is 18%. If you calculate tariff as a percentage of the overall imports of the U.S., it's significantly lower than that. It's, I don't know, 5%, possibly less than 5% from the total imports. So you could see that the impact of it is not as 18%. Second, I think it called for businesses to ignite their efficiency play. So a lot of businesses have actually been able to avoid passing most of that tariff into their end customers. Some of them will be able to do that sustainably because they basically became more efficient in their cost structure. Some of them may need to pass part of that, and you will see the impact of it in the next few quarters. And I'm not talking just here, I'm talking just globally, those who are impacted. And I think the third is possibly the impact of nations who have excess exports, exporting to us deflation, okay? So it's helping the world possibly unintentionally avoid an inflation because they are exporting cheaper products because there is no market. For example, countries who had to deal with high tariffs in the US will find in other markets that they will export to cheaper, which then basically then reduce the inflationary pressure globally. So I am optimist. So I'm not as pessimistic as some people, but I am very cautious also about it.
Is it the end of the Bretton Woods system as it was established in 1944? Are we in a new trading system, or where do you think that goes?
I don't think so. Yeah. I mean, if you, and I'll try to be as politically correct as I can, when the new administration took over, there were a lot of fear within this city, particularly the World Bank and the IMF, that what is the US administration position going to be in relation to the IMF and the World Bank. And the good news is actually the US is engaged. I can tell you firsthand as the chair of the IMFC that Scott has been a tremendous supporter of the institution. We are trying to reform the two institutions to make sure that they stick to their core mandates. I've always said, even before this year, for the last 4 or 5 years, that the two institutions possibly have expanded beyond their core mandate, and they need to refocus. We need to refocus our resources. We need to refocus our efforts. I've always said nobody will blame the IMF if they missed something to do with gender or even climate change, because there are other institutions that deal with these. But the IMF will be blamed if they missed an inflation, if they missed a serious debt crisis. And that's why it is important to refocus. And I personally, as in a Saudi position, not the IMFC chair, because I represent everybody in the IMF, but as a Saudi finance minister, I actually support that call from the US for the two institutions to refocus their efforts on their core mandate.
Interesting answer. So let me ask one or two questions with your Saudi hat on and instead of your IMF, your fund hat. Did you say that non-hydrocarbon revenue is at 56%?
The GDP, the non-oil percentage of GDP is at almost 56% now. The non-oil revenue, so that you could put this, yes, it's about 40%.
40% of total revenue.
That's right.
So what are
and remember, this was only 8 years ago, 10%, less than 10%.
It's a remarkable shift. So how do you balance near-term fiscal pressures with the long-term goal of building the non-oil revenue base, and where do you want to take it from 40%? What's an ideal percentage?
In terms of revenue, actually what we want is to grow the economy, and the revenue will grow with it. We have no intention of increasing the tax burden in the economy. So we think 18%, actually between 17 and 19, somewhere between 17 and 19% of the non-oil GDP is the right place where we are now. So our aim is not to increase the burden. Our aim is to increase the size of the economy, which then will generate more revenue. Second is, under Vision 2030, the non-oil economy is targeted to reach 65. So it was 40 when we started, now it is 56. Hopefully we will reach 65 or about there by 2030.
That would be incredibly impressive. Can you share also a little bit more with what you've called the fiscal reprioritization exercise mentioned in 2024? How is the government deciding which mega and giga projects yield the greatest long-term return? How are you readjusting in that respect?
Okay, I think it is actually an opportunity to suggest to the audience they actually look up the King's speech that was delivered by the Crown Prince to the Shura Council a few weeks back. It has actually a very clear messages to us in the government and to our own staff, saying we should avoid totally any ego attached to what we are doing. We should totally disconnect these programs from an ego that we started implementing something, we promoted it, and therefore we need to stick to it, okay? If it doesn't make sense, and that's the words that His Royal Highness have said, if we are committed to continue our reform, but if any strategy or project currently does not make sense to continue, because we started it years ago, things have changed, we will not have any hesitation of actually changing it, stopping it, and extending it. So where we are, just to answer your question, there are two areas that needs to be covered. One is the PIF, and I'm not the spokesperson for PIF, I'm a board member, and PIF board has gone through tremendous review of their portfolio and adjusted a lot of it. They are going through the strategy, they will announce it, and that will be made public. In the government, we spent almost 2 years now in recalibrating, and I can tell you there are things that we accelerated because we needed to make sure that they are ready for the tourism sector. For example, logistics. We needed to spend more and accelerate more in logistics because it will enable the tourism sector and it will enable the industrial and manufacturing sector. We are doubling down in the industrial sector. We are doubling down in the tourism. I mean, if you see the tourism numbers, the most ambitious person within the government did not actually even dream that we would reach where we are now. In 24, we turned the deficit in the balance of payments and services into a surplus. we had a target of 100 million tourists for 2030. We achieved that last year. And we, in 25, the first half of 25, we grew the surplus and the balance of payment on services significantly more than the first half of 24. So these are the areas where we are focusing on. The additional one that we are doubling down on is actually technology. And we don't want to be left behind on AI and technology at large. And that's an area of focus. However, we are not riding the hype. I think the risk of some nations trying to do everything in AI is very serious. So you need to be very selective of what part of the AI value chain that you have competitive advantage on and double down on it. And that's what we are doing.
So let me turn, I have 100 other questions. I have a couple on screen. I want to turn to the audience as well, please. If you could wait for the microphone and identify yourself, please, as well.
Hello, good afternoon. Noor Ammasha from Al-Sharq TV in Saudi Arabia and in Dubai. Minister Aljadaan, I wanted to comment on a point that you said. You mentioned that without proper adjustment for debt frameworks, it will be like imposing a tax without giving future generations a way to repay it. So can you tell us how Saudi Arabia is devising its debt framework in order to avoid pressures on future generations? And maybe this could be a clear roadmap for other developing nations that are facing fiscal deficits at this point. Thank you.
Very good question.
No, thank you. I think two things. One is we are actually very lucky in Saudi Arabia. We are in a position where possibly a lot of other nations does not have that advantage. We have one of the lowest debt to GDP in emerging economies and advanced economies. I think we are possibly one of the first or the second lowest in the G20. And therefore, that gives us really the space. Second is in our borrowing, and I've said this actually last year during the budget, if we choose to actually have a surplus in our budget, we can, literally. The deficit is coming from actually us by choice, by policy choice, borrowing to spend on strategies and programs that will create productivity, will create jobs, will create business opportunities. I think that is really the trick. If you are able to generate a growth, I mean, our non-oil growth is 4.8%. And if your borrowing cost is less than that, then you are actually on the good side. That's really where the policy will need to focus, is make sure that when you borrow, that borrowing is directed to a productive asset that will give you the yield, not only now, but also for generations to come.
So let me pick up one question from online. This is from a person named Anonymous. But very interesting question. As Saudi Arabia continues advancing its Vision 2030 goals, what skills or areas of expertise do you believe young Saudis should prioritize to play an active role in shaping the kingdom's economic transformation?
Well, very interesting, actually, question. Our human capital focus is a long-term play. I mean, we actually spend significant amount of time within the government and significant money to ensure that we actually improve our education system. And to answer the question directly, I think what really needs to be done is not to focus on a specific skill set, okay? I can tell you, and I've said this in universities in Saudi Arabia, you don't need to worry about what major you are in. Whether you are a lawyer studying law, because that's where I came from originally, or an engineer or a historian, that is fine. It's actually your ability to very quickly adapt to changes. I mean, you don't need to be educated in AI to be able actually to use it as a tool and to actually adapt it in your workplace, whatever that workplace is. It is your ability to read and adapt to changes, that's what matters. And that's what we are focusing on in our actually human capital development, is to ensure that our youth are able to adapt to changes. Because I can tell you, and I'm sure you have heard this so many times, a lot of jobs that we are going to have in 10 years, we don't know what they are. So we cannot educate our kids about these specific jobs. So you just need to make sure that you educate them to be able to have the flexibility to pick it up when it comes.
So I know you have a hard stop. I'll see if there's one more question. We can take one more here. A quick question, quick answer.
Justin Alexander from Collegiate Economics. You're actually a follow-on question on debt. Compared to the US, for example, which is borrowing to fund current spending, the narrative that you've laid out for Saudi Arabia is borrowing to invest in Vision 2030. And the markets are responding well. Rating agencies have upgraded you in recent years. But the IMF in its Article 4 sees debt rising to about 50% of GDP by 2030. Is that a level that you would be comfortable with if it finances the Vision 2030 plans? And if you get there by 2030, do you kind of envisage that, is that a stop point? Thank you.
And since this is the last question, you left one thing hanging where you said you have to pick the area of AI you want to specialize in. Can you share with us where you think the Saudi Arabia would be strongest?
Of course. I mean, on the debt side, I don't think we will even come close to 50%. We have a very clear strategy on the debt and the debt level and the threshold that we would tolerate. So we are unlikely to reach the 50% threshold. However, even if you reach the 50%, which is unlikely in the Saudi case, it is not the 50% where the problem is, or 60% in some countries. And it's really, where is this money going? You know, as long as it is going on productive assets, you know, if you are spending it on key infrastructure, connectivity, human capital, that will yield. I mean, look at the research and those who are specialized. Spending on human capital alone is actually going to give you 9 times, literally in one generation, 9 times the investment that you gave in human capital development. On AI, I think the areas where we have competitive advantage is, first of all, energy. And our energy mix is moving in the right direction. We said we will have 50% renewable, 50% gas. We are investing more than $60 billion. We started actually that investment 2 years ago, and it will be completed by 27. $60 billion in expanding our gas network. And we are investing similar amount in renewables and the grid upgrade. That then creates the opportunity for data centers to be set up in Saudi Arabia, powered by base load through the gas and renewables, and a lot cheaper than a lot of places around the world. So that is one competitive advantage. Second, you have a youth nation. I mean, 70% of our population is below 35, technology savvy. So you will be able actually to make sure that these youth, these talents are linked to adapt the AI and be available to investors in that sphere. That's just to name 2.
Mr. Minister, Minister Aljadaan, thank you so much. What a fascinating conversation. And I know the minister has to make his way to another appointment, so if you just hold your seats for a minute while we see the minister out. Thank you so much.
Thanks.